Welcome to the Unlock Your Culture webcast, a monthly discussion about preserving traditional fire service culture in the modern setting. With your hosts, Sean Duffy, Pablo Jenner, John Hayowick, and Mark Alone. We hope you enjoy the show. Welcome, everybody, to episode 14 of the Unlock Your Culture webcast. I am host Mark Alone. I have my co-host, partner in crime, Sean Duffy, with us this evening, and
Finally.
our awesome guest, Eric Dreiman. Eric, did I say it right?
Yep, you sure did.
Man, I'm usually bad with names, and I forgot to ask you, so maybe I need to stop asking people and just go with my gut, Sean. I don't know. What do you think?
It's usually either Dreamin' or Dreiman. You got a 50% shot, so yeah, you did good.
There we go.
Yeah.
So I'm shooting good tonight. So Eric comes to us from Indianapolis, where he is the chief of training. He's been on the job long enough to be here with us this evening. Truckie by trade, and accomplished instructor and speaker across many of the various platforms and conferences. So we're really happy to have him here this evening and kind of pick his brains. So not much going on my end of the world here. Been home all week with the COVID. It finally caught up with me. So mandatory quarantine and sinus infection, and hopefully I'll be getting back on duty this week. Duff, you got anything before we dive down in this?
Yeah, let me walk away from this heat that just kicked on so you can actually hear me.
Jobtown.
No, it's we just got that heater out there, so it kicks on and off, you know.
I got you.
I don't really have anything, honestly. Just been kind of getting over COVID myself, so that was a fun experience. I wish I could never do that again. But other than that, just staying busy, you know, kind of spreading the knowledge tree, if you will, trying to make what little impact we can here in the state of Michigan. There's not much fire training for firefighters around here, so we're trying to change that a little bit. We're trying to put on more classes, and we have a conference that we're in the middle of scheduling right now, getting the final touches on. That'll be in June of this year, I believe the 16th through the 18th. So that's been taking up a lot of time, especially since it's live fire, so there's a lot of planning and everything that goes in with that, but it's going to be good. It's going to be 3 good days of engine and truck company operations, and just kind of doing what works for, especially for a lot of us here too, which is limited staffing. That's what we face. So, you know, just trying to take a different approach to it since I moved back to Michigan, and just keep at it and trying to leave the fire service better than I found it. That's really all I've been up to these days.
Well, good. That'll give us a nice tie-in here. So, Chief, we're going to talk about truck stuff. Did I miss anything relevant in the bio you need to add before we start going down these rabbit holes?
No, not at all. I'm just a fireman. That's what I tell people when people ask me where I work. I say I'm a fireman on the Indianapolis Fire Department. You know, that's good enough for me.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. All those other accolades, they are what they are. So.
Well, you are a truckie by trade, as you told me, and I'm actually pretty impressed because you might be one of the most well-spoken truckies I ever met. There's been no loud grunts or moans and groans here since we've been corresponding. You've typed in coherent sentences, so I'm impressed. You know, you have an opportunity today to speak for all the truckies and take all that bad stereotype away, right?
Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, I get that a lot. I don't get as much now in my current position, but back in I still get a little bit of it from the guys I've worked with over the years, but, you know, especially in the firehouse, I love that kind of stuff, man. You know, going back and forth and being called a fireman's helper and all that sort of stuff, you know, so.
Well, you got to watch God's work. So
that's right.
If you couldn't tell, I'm an engine guy by trade, and that's mainly because I'm probably too small to be a truck guy. You got to be kind of north of 6 foot to get on the truck company, this tall to ride this ride kind of thing. So,
yeah.
So I do want to pick your brain, though. You know, you don't meet a lot of, quote unquote truck guys these days in the all hazard service because everybody's kind of doing everything. And a lot of those skills I think have bled over. So as far as truck companies and the culture of fire departments, what are we doing right? What are we doing wrong? What do you see out there?
Well, first of all, I'll say that, I didn't start out as a truck guy. It was something that I kind of grew into and had an interest in and tried to develop myself and get to where I am now. But, in my travels around the country and talking to different people, what I see a lot of times is people don't focus on truck work like they should. The truck company may only go out on a run for the big one, right? The big warehouse fire or the big commercial fire, things like that. They don't think about, in my opinion, a lot of departments don't think about truck company operations as offensive. They think more of truck company operations as defensive actions. I'm fortunate where I work. We have dedicated engine and truck companies, and so that makes for a better culture simply because we have it. But even if you work in an organization that is has a handful of firehouses and you've got mostly engines, or maybe you've got all engines and you don't have an aerial device, things like that, that truck work still needs to be done. It shouldn't be an afterthought. The truck work itself goes a long way towards helping the engine crew get their job done. And in my opinion, a lot of places don't put enough emphasis on training on those skills. Outside of search, which in my view, search is everybody's responsibility. Life comes first, but ultimately that's a truck task. That's a truck function typically, regardless of what you're riding on when you show up at a fire. That's normally what we think of as one of the responsibilities of a truck crew, to search. So outside of that, a lot of departments don't, in my opinion, put enough emphasis on the forcible entry, on the ventilation, when to horizontally versus vertically ventilate. Throwing ladders is another area where I see a lot of departments that, it's an afterthought. And I get it, not everybody's blessed with tons of people. And, if you've got limited staffing, you've got to deal with what you got. But at the same time, at least having the foresight and the thought that, we're going to do as many of these truck functions as we can. And sometimes maybe if we do one or two of these truck functions, it can actually help resolve the incident faster than not doing them and focusing solely on engine work.
Yeah. So I'm one of those people. I despise what we've done with the all hazards fire service and taking away of specialized companies. And I don't say that to be critical of decision makers and budgets and politicians and elected officials. Like, I understand there's many things in society that we've kind of been forced into, but when I listen to you talk about these things, and this is kind of where I've evolved, I guess, my thinking as an engine company, person and then an engine company officer, is that aside from the aerial device, aside from probably the longer ladders, I won't even say a 28, but a 35 plus foot ladder, and then a redundancy of equipment or your heavier forcible entry, all of those skills could easily be accomplished by the engine company with their complement of equipment, right? Throwing a ground ladder for a rescue on arrival, searching off the line is a tenet of, a good aggressive engine company. Forcible entry. I've had this conversation numerous times trying to figure out, how to order skills in a probation book, is that if you can't get in the building, you can't do anything, right? And so I don't know if you want to speak to that as far as, have we gone too far in trying to separate these skills as this is what the truck company does, but the reality is a lot of volunteer departments, if they have a truck company, it's later than in the alarm if they can staff it and get it there. And even for the career departments, I know for us, I can only speak to what I run, but on a residential job, you're getting 4 and 1. So when that ladder gets there, depending where they fall in the queue, what has been accomplished or should have been accomplished before they arrive versus dictating, it's the truck company, it has to do this, it has to do that.
Yeah, no, you've got to address the problems that you're presented with in an incident. And if you don't have a truck company there, then somebody else has got to pick up that slack, right? And you're exactly right. All of those skills, if you're in an organization where you don't have truck crews coming to accomplish those tasks, then your people on your engines have to be proficient at them. And that certainly puts a greater burden on them, because now they've not only got to be focused on getting a water supply, stretching a line, but now they've got to worry about forcible entry, potentially, and certainly search, and getting inside and making sure that everybody's out and all those sorts of things. But, I teach, one of the classes I teach, VES. I am very adamant about it because people think, well, VES is a big city thing, or, I'm not from Chicago, I'm not from New York, or someplace like that. Those are the places that do VES. And I always say, no, that's not accurate. And if you think about it, particularly if you're in an organization that has limited staffing, many times you're not going to be able, maybe you won't be able to pull a line and do a search at the same time, or, a multitude of other tasks. But any two firefighters, whether you're rolling up in an engine, you're rolling up on an ambulance, you're in some sort of QRV, whatever it is, any two firefighters can pull off a VES as long as they've got access to a ladder and some basic hand tools. They don't have to roll up in $1.5 million tractor drawn aerial to do those sorts of things, right? So, regardless of what you're rolling up on, you've got to be able to accomplish those tasks. And that's why it's important that people be as well-rounded as they can. I've said I've worked on engines. I don't have anything against engines, but I'm not what I would consider an engine guy. But at the same time, when I was in the companies, particularly when I would work a trade or I'd work overtime, even though I was on a truck, I still had the responsibility to make sure that I knew how to pull a line, how to, manage water supply and all those sorts of things. And conversely, if you're on an engine, you still need to be capable of doing those truck functions, whether it's because there's not a truck or the truck's delayed or busy doing other things. So I think it's important that overall we do our best, particularly for our younger folks, to make sure that they're well-rounded, and they can do whatever tasks they get faced with or assigned by their officer.
Yeah, I share your sentiments with the VES thing too, especially having a volunteer background, is that you're already behind the 8 ball, especially as a volunteer, right? On the career side, we have reaction time, we have the 911 call, all that stuff. But then you're even further behind the 8 ball on the volunteer side, depending on if you're at work, who's at the station, where the call is in your jurisdiction. And so to me, pulling up, if you have 1 or 2 rooms in a well-off building that you get in and search now, like you said, life comes first. And sometimes we get blinded by that whole, we got to have a line, we got to have a line. Like, I agree, but you start prioritizing these things. And to me, that's more of a small town tactic than it is a big city one, because the big city is sending these truck companies on these calls and they're all getting there about the same time. So interesting that you've had that in your travels, and how maybe that tactic is misconstrued because of who's teaching it or where it came from. I'm going to throw you a dirty pitch here, though, and I'm going to ask you, I'll put you on the spot. Is it VES or is it VEIS? There is no right answer.
Right.
I hate that. It's one of those, I can't stand these petty arguments we have in the fire service.
I teach a class at a rather large conference, and the title of the class is VEIS, because it keeps it. Part of that philosophy is keeping in line with the modern fire science and, the UL and NIST and isolation, door control, all those sorts of things. Personally, one, I'm partly because I guess I'm lazy, but I just call it VES, right? I say the I is silent, even though my class may say VEIS, or my instructor shirt may say VEIS on it. I always just tell people the I is silent, right? We've always been doing door control. To me, if it's taught right, it's practiced right, it's performed right at an actual fire, then the eye is going to get taken care of, right? So you can go either way with it. So I'll leave it at that. If you see classes advertised that I do, normally it's got the I in it. But when I talk about it, if I say VES, that doesn't mean I don't think the I is important, but the I is in there whether I say it or not. I mean, it always has been. So part of it's marketing, I think, and part of it's, I don't know, somebody decided that they wanted to put their mark on the industry, so they added the I at some point along the way, and then everybody else jumped on the bandwagon.
Yeah,
To each
I
their
like
own.
that. I'm going to steal that, I think, if you don't mind. The I is silent. That's probably the best way I've ever heard it described. So very good. So I got one more I'm going to shoot at you here, and then I'm going to
All right.
let Sean dive in here with whatever he's got on the truck company stuff. So something that we do in my neck of the woods, which I've kind of taken a liking to over time, it was kind of foreign to me at first, is that we don't really call it truck work. We call it support company work, and because
Okay.
depending on where you are, it may come from a rescue company. It may come from I've seen things called service trucks, which are basically a rescue without the giant rescue body. But while we're on the topic of words, with VEIS and VS, like I think
Mhm.
sometimes that matters. And so when you take the truck company out of it and you make it support work, it
Mhm.
kind of it kind of to me defines it better in a way that maybe people here I think truck work and say, oh, I'm not a truck guy, screw that. Well, no, but we all have to do support work because we're all trying to support the push and the search and all that. So
Right.
what is it called where you are? What have you seen? Do you think it matters what we call it, or is it more defining what the skills are?
Well, I think it's important that we define what the skills are. But I understand where you're coming from. Um, and I've heard it called fireground support functions or firefighter support functions as well. Regardless of what you call it, again, it's all in how you package it, right? It's the same thing. If you need to call it for your organization or for your area, if you need to call it support functions in order to get buy-in versus calling it truck work, as long as the job's getting done, everybody understands that what those different functions are, what those different tasks are. I think that's the important thing, not so much what we call it, but it's one man's opinion. So,
Yeah, I agree. I'd call it fundamentals, right? Because
yeah,
a lot of the stuff we talk about, I remember were basic firefighter one skills when I came up, and maybe
right.
that's the problem. We've forgotten that. So, Duff, what you got, my friend?
Well, I'm going to share some of the same sentiments that Chief had and that you had too. Is here, majority of my career, I've worked for limited staffing departments. So, we didn't always have truck companies. We would just send an extra engine on the assignment and they would kind of fill in that role. And I had this conversation with somebody not too long ago because they're like, oh, you teach a lot of truck work. And I told them, I was like, no, I teach firefighter skills. Because that's what I truly believe it is. Whether you're assigned, like Chief said, to an ambulance or an engine or a ladder or truck, whatever you want to call it, there's a certain expectation of tactical priorities that need to happen, and people need to be assigned to that. So I really think that, like, if that is where you're at and you don't work for a place that has those dedicated units, you really need to be training everybody to operate on that same level. And what I saw throughout a lot of my career for many years was like, the guys that got assigned to the ambulance, they weren't being utilized properly, right? I mean, those guys could show up. They could do outside vent work. They could do, they could do the search if need be. I mean, literally, they were plug and play, and they could be put anywhere to do anything. And I think that's what firefighters need to focus on more than titles is this is the task that I might be given, and I need to get it done, and I need to do it in a timely manner. I need to educate myself about all aspects of what we do. And with that being said, we also have to play off each other's strengths and weaknesses. Like there's some people that I've worked with, I don't want them on a hand line. It's not that they're bad people. It's just they don't understand that function. So whether that's a training issue or it's a mindset issue on that person, I don't know. But there's a time and a place to put certain people in certain roles because you can, you could trust them to get the work done. So for me, it all comes down to terminology and training. Every place operates differently, but we have to be setting our members up for success. And the only way to do that is say, hey, listen, like example, today I'm working at a different firehouse. I'm on every unit here. There's only two guys, me and another senior fireman. So we have the truck company, we have the engine, and we have the ambulance. So depending on the call that comes out, we need to be good at all of it, and there's no hiding. Because we have to take that piece of equipment somewhere. And then when we get there, we're expected to fill those roles. So if we can train all of our firefighters initially from day one to have that mindset of, although I'm not on a dedicated truck company or a squad or whatever, I might have to extricate somebody. I need to know how to do this. I might have to force a door or do a search or ventilate a roof. Like, these are all real possibilities on a fire ground, and we don't get the opportunity to sit back and go, whoa, hold on a second. Like, I don't do that. Yeah. You know, the citizens don't want to hear it, and all you do is really like jam up the fire ground, and you delay all these tasks, which for the incident commander is very overwhelming. So there's a lot of trust that I feel needs to go into this. So that's really just my rant on it. About the VES or VEIS, Chief, I'm with you. There, as an educator, you have to kind of stay up on modern terminology and what people are using so they understand it. I personally, I call it search. If I happen to say VES, then that's what I say. But it all encompasses the same thing, and that's what I stress to people is don't get so consumed by a checklist of things that you have to do like in this certain order, because if I say VEIS to you and you go in and there's no door, then you're freaking out like, hey, where's this door? Like, you got to know when to adapt to your situation and understand that your conditions are going to drive your tactics. So I try and keep it as simple as possible when talking to people, and just say, hey, listen, all that's different about this is your mode of entry. That's it. You know, we'll put 8 people through a front door and don't think twice about it. We put 2 people through a window. Everyone loses their mind. It's literally the same concept. Yeah. You're just changing your approach. So again, like, getting people to wrap their head around that concept of, let's get away from titles, let's get away from all this and understand that this is a fire ground function, and we need to be as proficient at it as possible. And the other thing with the VES, Chief, I don't know if you teach this or whatever, but I tell all the students that take a class, you know, my search class or anything, understand, like, you can want to do something as bad as you want to do it, but there comes a time where you do have to like pull the reins and step back, because if I have a firefighter, it's just his or her 3rd day on shift and we're going, it's probably not the person I want to say, hey, go take that window and jump in. You know, there's a level of accountability that I still have for that individual. So, hey, maybe although VES would be the proper thing to do right now, it's safer to for everybody if we suppress this fire and let this next in company take care of this who has more experience with it. Because as much as we want to make the rescue and the grab, I also don't want to lose a firefighter in the process. So that's just kind of my mindset about it. So I'm curious how you feel about that as well, Chief.
Well, I'm pretty fortunate, you know, in the organization that I work in and the fire academy and things, we teach our people in the academy about VES, and they perform VES during the academy multiple times. But, you know, not everybody's that fortunate. You know, a lot of departments, and I haven't always been here. I started out as a volunteer. I was a volunteer for 4 or 5 years. Worked for a smaller fire department. 40 firefighters and 3 firehouses when I worked there. You know, we didn't have truck companies and all that sort of stuff. So a lot of those things coming up before I got here in Indianapolis, all that stuff was pretty basic, and I didn't understand a lot of those things. So I agree with you that, you know, well, VES is not some sort of advanced tactic, or you need, you know, 20 years on the job to be able to perform it. I would concur that it is something that you certainly probably don't want the new guy doing. You know, particularly if something's rocking and rolling and you got concerns about, you know, this is going to be close or this is going to be tight. I was been in situations like that with 15 years on, and I still was puckering. So, yeah, I would agree, Sean, that, you know, for a newer person, it's probably not something you want to have them doing if you've got some other options available.
Yeah, and I like that you bring that up, because, you know, around the country is different. And what's interesting about the fire service is, like, if we worked at like a Walmart or a Taco Bell or something like that, all those employees, no matter what Walmart or Taco Bell you work at, like, that position that they have is going to be the same. It's all the same training. Mm-hmm. And the fire service is so dynamic, you know, and what I found over the years is that some fire academies will touch on advanced tactics, not that VES is advanced by any means, but there's things that we can do outside of the basics that could make it more of a bigger operation, right? Like maybe like extending beyond that door if we're able to, and fire attack's got a handle on it. But what tends to happen is, depending on what fire academies these people go to, some of them are being told, hey, this is dangerous, we don't do it. Some of them are being told that's an outdated tactic, like whatever. There's just so many things out there that I feel are confusing firefighters. And I think that's where we're failing. Like, we have to understand, like, what is our objective, right? And when I went through fire academy, the acronym LIP, right? So life safety being number one, incident stabilization, property conservation. And that was always beat into my head. But even that small little acronym, like when I asked that question in classes, who's heard it? You'd be surprised how many people are hearing it for the first time. So I'd like to see, like, I know you're big on training and everything else too. And I think that in order for us to progress forward as a fire service and all be on the same page across the country of all these things, like, that really does start in training, right? We have to establish that mindset and let the expectation be known of, these are things that you may have to do, and I'm going to teach you how to do it. So as educators, we have to really be up to date on, like you said, the UL studies and NIST and all that stuff, and best current practice, and if you're not doing that, then you're setting these students up for failure, and then they get on the fire ground, and then you get mad at them when you give them a task and they don't understand how to do it. And, I just think that adds a lot of confusion to everybody too, when it comes to doing things. And that's just a really bad spot to be putting people in, especially fire grounds, hectic as it is. You've got all these things running through everyone's mind, and we should really try and simplify it as much as possible, I guess is my point.
No, I agree. And I like your comparison with working at a Walmart or a Taco Bell or something like that. I've heard it. Actually, I heard it from Aaron Fields as part of his Nozzle Forward class. He talks about one of the things that is one of the biggest detriments to the American Fire Service is that we don't have a common language, which is basically what you're getting at, Sean. If you look at if you're an electrician or you're a plumber or one of the other blue collar trades, they have a standard language across the country, right? And I'm no electrician or plumber, but if I say 110 or 220 or 240 or whatever in Indianapolis, it means the same thing as it does in Tucson, Arizona. Whereas if I say truck work in Indiana, it might mean something different in or the old comparison of tanker. Well, tanker for us is a big tank, milk truck looking thing, and out west it's an airplane that flies over wildland. So we don't have that common nomenclature, and that's a big issue, I think. Yeah, we've got our, you've got IFSTA, you've got the fire engineering, you've got, all the other standardized firefighter 1 and 2 curriculums and things. But even if you go look at those, you lay out the same chapter in those 2 books, and you're not going to get the same answer. So I think, or the same information always. So I think a lot of it is standardization, is a big one going forward. Even if it's not nationally standardized, certainly regionally, if you're running with 4 or 5 or 6 other departments, you've got a county fire chiefs association or your metropolitan firefighters association or something like that, at least have, a common understanding of what everybody's doing and how the mission's going to get accomplished.
Yeah. And I'll just bring up one thing and then I'll turn it back over to Mark. One of the things that bothers me whenever, whether it be in the firehouse or out, some other place, is I always hear this term like, well, that's not how IFSTA does it. The one thing that I want to make very clear to everybody is that IFSTA is not a governing body of anything. They are a for-profit publishing company, right? So when we put emphasis on that and we don't understand, like, they really have nothing to do with how we operate on the fire ground, I've seen that like really become an issue. Is, well, it's not in the book and this is not how I was taught how to do it, so we're just not going to do it. And that's terrible in my viewpoint, because no, I happen to be a paramedic, right? What if I have a patient that needs some treatment? Like, I can't say, well, that wasn't in my paramedic textbook, so I don't know how to take care of you. Like, that's just not going to be acceptable. They want some sort of action. So I always try and make it a point to people of, like, be careful where you're getting your information from and what you choose to put, like, all of your emphasis on, because if it is that book, you're going to have a really, really rough career, and hopefully somebody's there to kind of shake you out of it and show you the right way. But a lot of times that's what people, do their whole career is what was in that book. And then we pass that down, to the next generation coming in, and they don't know any better. So they pass that down. So if we're really after change and efficiency and things like that, then understand that is the starting point, right? That book has enough knowledge to give you a basic idea of what's going on, but it is not the holy grail. And we need to stop treating it as such.
Man, so many things to say there. We just don't have enough time. It's a great segue, though, as we kind of dive over into the training aspect, Eric. And some of the things I've taken Aaron's class twice now. I wish I had taken it more. I need to take it more. But yeah, I agree wholeheartedly with the language thing. But you can dive so much deeper into it. We did NIMS, right, and we still have people using 10 codes. We have two different standards for staffing, one for volunteer, one for career, but it's the same job. The double standards in this profession are wide and far, and it just depends what benefits you and what doesn't. All the way down into training and how many hours of training it was required to be a volunteer firefighter, depending where you live, and then the ISO requirements for a career fire department just in CE alone. And so I guess we can kind of start there. Obviously, I think when people think about training, first and foremost, I think they think fire academy. They think recruits, they think firefighter one, but they don't really grasp, I guess, depending on where they come from in their background, is how encompassing the training division is for the agency as a whole and not just its new members. So why don't we take just a couple minutes here, and why don't you tell us the down and dirty reality version of what training actually is in the fire department, so we can dispel the myths, right now before we dive into it.
Yeah. Well, my experience is that a lot of times when an incident doesn't go well, or a firefighter gets hurt, or, worse, an apparatus gets wrecked, whatever it is, basically something bad happens. Oftentimes the first word out of somebody's mouth is, well, it's a training issue, right? So it doesn't seem to matter what the issue is. A lot of times it gets addressed, or the focus gets put on, well, they were trained wrong, or they forgot their training, or they need more training on something to reinforce what to do or what not to do. But in reality, so that's one part of it that I get hit with quite a bit. But really, for me, fire training encompasses everything. And I'm fortunate, we have different divisions that focus on the different all hazards training that we do. But to me, training is not only training your new people, but it's in training your incumbents. You have to provide them with training, because just like any industry, the technology, the information changes, right? If I was going to come on this job and go through the fire academy in 1990, when I first started as a volunteer, and live off of that training for the next 30 or 40 years of my career and never learn anything else, I'm going to be behind the eight ball, and I'm not going to be able to do my job well. So there's that continuing education aspect. Certainly our officers need training. To me, that's one of the areas that we've neglected historically in the fire service, is our management and leadership training, particularly leadership training. The engineers need their component, the driving and emergency response and pumping and apparatus positioning and all those things. And that's not even talking about EMS, which is obviously the biggest component of our job anymore, regardless of where you work. The EMS requirements are huge in and of themselves. And then, then we talk about special ops, and that's another layer in there, right? So, man, it's a heck of a lot more than just training some recruits to be able to ride backwards on a fire engine or a ladder truck or in an ambulance or whatever. We have a 5-year plan or a 3-year plan that we update at the beginning of every year. We've got to march out our training and plan our calendars that far out just to make sure that we're getting everything delivered to the members of the organization that we need to make sure that they're getting the training, they're getting what they need for preparation to move up in the organization, whether that's to be a driver operator, engineer, chauffeur, whatever you call them in your organization, or an officer or a chief officer, whatever the case might be. So it's certainly, and that's why I've got my job. It's a full-time job, planning that stuff and managing all those different classes. It's a huge undertaking, particularly for this organization, but for any organization, regardless of your size. You still owe it to the community. As I tell our new recruits, normally as part of one of my speeches, I'll give them at some point, during the academy, it's how many calls a day do you expect us, the public, expect us to get right? What percentage of calls every day does the public expect us to get right? And, I normally get a bunch of saucer-eyed, oh God, don't call on me kind of looks, when I'm standing in front of a bunch of recruits. But basically the answer is, and we all know it, 100%, right? They don't expect us, I couldn't have a major league batting average of 350 on this fire department and be considered a success like I would in the majors. I've got to have a 100% batting record, right? And that's pretty damn hard to do. We all know how hard that is sometimes, regardless of our best efforts. We're not always successful, but that shouldn't be because we didn't know what to do or we weren't proficient at how to do something. It should be because, if we aren't successful, it was because maybe the person had just been dead too long, or there was, whatever the case might be. So it's huge undertaking and training, in my opinion. People oftentimes poo-poo on training, and particularly in the career fire service, they're like, oh gosh, I don't want to train again today, but I know how to do that. But it's much more than just knowing how to do something. It's being proficient at it and being able to pull it off when you're not thinking straight and it's 2:00 in the morning and it's snowing out or whatever. So that's a long ramble, but
no, you hit some great points, and something you brought up, which I think is so important, is that we do really lack. I'll go one step below the leadership and the management. We lack with the engineer training, to me, because as somebody that is not very mechanically inclined as far as automobiles go, it's not like 20 and 30 years ago when everybody took auto shop at school, right? Everybody changed their own oil. They knew how to do that. We've taken that out of schools, and we've also taken it out of the firehouses, and Fleet will fix it, the shop will fix it. Well, how many times has my apparatus sat at Fleet for a week or two for a light bulb or a fuse or a rocker switch or something very basic that we could be doing? And just, that's where it starts to me, and it goes up. Like the art of it's like we've become so lost in the basics because they have expanded that we've wrote off everything else, and we're going to just dump everything we have into these recruits, and that's where it stops. And it's really a disservice to our members because we have so many good people. They just, like you said, they just don't know what to do, and it's not their fault. It's not negligence. They've just never been taught. And now who looks bad? We do, right? We look bad. And so I want to pick your brain. Sean, you got something? I saw you off mute. I want to cut you off if you had something.
No, the only thing I'm going to add is pretty much like, and Chief kind of alluded to it already, is, listen, like, I can throw a football, but that doesn't make me an NFL quarterback, right? The difference between me and them is lots of sets and reps and training and understanding exactly what it takes to throw that with precision and all that stuff. And the other thing is, like, you brought up auto stuff. Well, guess what? Every single person on this podcast or in this country or whatever at some point will or already has a driver's license. But that doesn't mean we all drive the same. And we see that on the road every day. So when it comes to our profession, what we got to understand is, congratulations, you graduated the academy. Congratulations, you've been on the job for a little bit. But there's different levels to this game, and you need to decide which level you want to be on, because like Chief said, they expect perfection 100% of the time. They don't care if you're having a bad day, you're going through a divorce, you got a migraine. None of that matters to them. They want you to do what they expected you to do. That's why they called you. So there is, when it comes to training, like people need to understand that. They need to understand, like, it's a never-ending thing. It doesn't just stop, you know, like you get pulled over, you get a traffic ticket, okay, I'll pay that ticket, it's the end of that. That's not reality for us in the fire service, right? We have a bad day, someone dies, and that's a problem, right? So what we do matters, and what we don't do also matters, and it's about outcomes more than anything else. If you're not committed to that, then just don't even step into it, right? Because we're everybody's keepers, you know, like Chief Mo Davis says, like, when people put their babies to bed at night, we're their keepers. And there's so much truth to that. But, you know, that's my little rant on that. Is just because you wear the t-shirt, or you got a, whether it be volunteer, paid on call, career, whatever, you got a position in the fire department, that doesn't make you a firefighter. Okay. Everything you do after that, and everything you fail at, and everything you learn in between and continue to improve on, the overall end result of all of that is what makes you a firefighter. And you have to have passion and a desire to want to serve. And if you don't have any of that, then maybe this just isn't where you need to be.
Mm-hmm. Right on, man. So let me ask you this, Chief. You know, I think training gets a bad name sometimes because of the way it's approached, right? So from both sides. One, I think people that are in firehouses kind of, like you said, they shit on training. Like what you know, oh, those who can't do teach, right? We've heard it over and over and over again, but we all know from taking amazing classes from people who've been there and done that well before us, it's not true. But at the same time, most of us have had that experience with somebody in training that wanted to talk to us as a tenured firefighter like we were idiots. And so I think there's a disconnect, at least in my experience, of people take training as the fire academy, both on the trainer side and the student side, but we're not really good at understanding it means learning. So what are some tips you can give us for teaching somebody that is a firefighter already, not training to become a firefighter, if that makes sense?
Well, the big thing that I always tell you know, the guys that I work with, we talk about going out and being humble, right? We work for the firefighters. We work for the fire department. They don't work for us, right? That's the goal. That's the job of the training division. So approaching it from a humble perspective, but having yourself squared away up front, knowing the material, and then going out and basically talking to them and saying, you know, look, we're not here to make anybody look bad. We want you to be successful. A lot of times when we deliver training, it'll be in a more relaxed atmosphere where we'll demonstrate some of the techniques or the skills that we're going to have them review. One, to show that we know what we're talking about and that we're capable of doing it. And then two, you know, it doesn't always go perfect for us either. But it kind of puts everybody at ease and lets them know that, you know, we're not there to look for a scapegoat. We're not there to look to make fun of anybody. We're just all there to train, right? And practice some stuff that we may or may not be good at. And if you're good at it and you smoke this drill and you make us all look, you know, look bad, then good on you. But normally that's not my experience. You know, it's you got people that want to act like they know everything or that they're capable of doing everything, but oftentimes, you know, they've got areas of weakness or areas they could improve on. So we just try and take a non-confrontational approach, try and make it as fun and as interesting as we can, as relaxed as we can. Certainly if we're in the academy, it's a little bit different atmosphere than if we're dealing with incumbent firefighters. But the whole goal is to make everybody better and make them capable of serving the community safer, faster, more proficiently, and then ultimately having a good long career. So there's a lot to it. It's I could go on and on and on about my philosophies on a lot of this stuff, and what I tell the people that I teach with or that come into the training division. I have a big long talk with them. We talk about a lot of those expectations coming in, and I think that goes a long way. Setting up your instructors for success by laying out your expectations for them and letting them know that they need to approach things from a side of humbleness and humility, rather than walking in and treating everybody like an idiot or acting like you're a drill instructor in the military. It goes a long way.
Yeah, and I think it's a point to make too, though, is, as firefighters that come from a company to training, we have a responsibility to go there to learn as well. That doesn't mean that you can't teach. It doesn't mean you can't interject. But I think the confrontation a lot of time, to me, doesn't come from the trainers. I've seen those trainers that want to treat you like you're a new recruit, but I've seen a lot of people that are closed-minded and do not want to try something new. And so instead of being, cooperative, hey, maybe I'm not going to do it this way, but I'm going to sit here and listen, they want to start a fight. And that's right. So many people, like Tim said, a lot of people, they're afraid because, they're not comfortable, whether it's because they don't want to do the nozzle forward style hose advance. Doesn't mean they're not comfortable advancing hose line. They're just uncomfortable with that method. And so I think we all have a responsibility, not only as just firefighters, but as adults, to not be that person. It's okay to share your information, but it's also, know your role and know your time and your place. Okay. You're not gaining any points by showing up the training division representative because you've been doing it, 10 years longer than them. It's stupid. Right.
No, I agree. And another thing that I believe in wholeheartedly and kind of, made plenty of mistakes along the way in my career and things that I wish I could go back and do different in hindsight. But I started using the phrase, somebody'd say, well, they're doing it wrong. And I'd say, well, are they doing it wrong? Or are they just not doing it the same way you do it? Because, the way I force a door may not be the way that you or Sean would force a door, but yet we both accomplished the mission, and the same. The end game's the same, right? If I get that door open and I get it open in a rapid manner, whether I do one technique or another, doesn't really matter as long as I'm doing it in an approved, safe way. So that goes a long way as well. But I still. People's egos do get in the way, and you see that a lot, particularly when we have, department-wide trainings. People are afraid they're going to look bad in front of their peers, or they're going to be made to look like they aren't as good at their job as they think they are, and that's hard to overcome. But like I said, we go out of our way not to embarrass anybody, and make sure that people don't feel like they're being put on the spot or they're being evaluated for something that they're going to get dinged for later, right? It's a learning opportunity, and that's how you have to look at it. Not everybody does, unfortunately, but that's the way we approach it. It's not punitive. It's not disciplinary, none of that stuff. It's just an opportunity to get a little bit better at the job.
Yeah, well said, Chief. Well, there's a couple things there, and one, I think anybody who's has some experience with educating understands that when it comes to training, the important thing is to make people feel comfortable and realize, like, hey, I'm not here to show you what you do right or do wrong per se. I'm here to also learn with you, and collectively as a team, we're going to figure this thing out and find out what works best, and that's the ultimate goal. And when it comes, like, I can't stand when instructors bark and yell and stuff like that, because in my mind, my first thing is to ask, like, why did you become an instructor? What is your reasoning? Like, do you want to pass on your knowledge or your failures or any of those things so people, A, can get better, or B, not make the same mistakes you did? Or are you there to truly set them up for success? Because if you are, then you have to understand, like, everybody's learning the way they learn is different. The way they might perform tasks is different. And a good educator, instructor, whatever you want to call it, they're going to be able to take every person that's there training and say, let me figure out what works best for you. All right. There's all these different options, and I'm going to work with you and figure out, like, I'm a smaller guy. I've been 5'7" my whole life pretty much. And I'll tell you, I always got made fun of, oh, you can't pick up that ladder, like whatever. And well, guess what? What it did is it instilled in me a lack of confidence on doing ladders. So for a long time in my career, I didn't want to touch a ladder because I didn't feel confident. And it wasn't until fairly into my career, I met somebody who worked with me and said, hey, let me show you some tips and tricks. I do it this way, but let me see how you do it. And I showed him, and he goes, okay, we can work with this. And we tried multiple different ways, high shoulder, low shoulder, whatever, to get that ladder thrown by myself in a timely manner and efficiently. And that's what we have to really lean towards when we're dealing with people in a training setting is, hey, cool. I don't, like Chief said, I'm not here to embarrass you. I'm here to make you better. So if you're struggling with this, maybe myself or somebody else here can show you something that is of benefit to you that's going to make you do this, and then you can feel comfortable and confident, and then you no longer shy away from that task that you're given. And I've just seen it so many times where there's like the yelling and the screaming and the belittling, and all that does is turn people off. It turns them off to wanting to train. And it really, like, there's a term, training scars. That's a mental training scar you just gave somebody, right? So if we're trying to turn people onto this and make training fun and something that people can look forward to, our approach on how we do that is very, very critical.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up training scars. It's a good kind of transition, but there is a time and a place to yell, right? But again, that's the difference between brand new civilians becoming firefighters and firefighters continuing their education. You said something, Eric, that kind of struck me, right? There's no right way to do things sometimes, and to me, that's a training scar that has come with this skill sheet certified BS we've become as a fire department. Because when you're going through recruit school and when you're being tested on your annual skills reviews by your department or probation, whatever it is, there is in fact a right freaking way to do it, but that doesn't apply right down the road kind of thing between what we discover works in the street and when that kind of kicks over and train to where we start kind of maybe correcting or improving upon some of the methods that we've been teaching. So what's your experience with that? If you share my experience there, do we know why and how can we maybe combat that? Maybe because we all know the kid that comes to the firehouse, right? Okay, kid, you got your cert. Now we're going to teach you how we do it in the street. To me, that's inexcusable that we even allow that.
Yeah, and I get that a lot. When you're talking about hiring new people, running a fire academy, I always tell people that yes, there is a difference between the way we do it in the academy and the way that certain things get done on the street. I can't argue that. Not only from a supervisory standpoint and running a fire academy, but having firsthand experience, having worked on the street, I get that. But the way I explain it to people is, particularly people who challenge me on it, is I said, we have to, I have a couple of different analogies, but I say we teach these recruits how to operate in black and white, right? The steps, the steps to raising a ladder, or the steps to pulling a hand line, all those sorts of things, how to hook up to a hydrant, whatever it is, right? On the street, we operate in the gray, or what I refer to as the gray, which is, well, this is the way we really do it, kid. Kind of like you said earlier, Mark. But they can't operate in the gray until they understand the black and white, is what I say. So, in the academy, yeah, that we understand and we do our best to minimize and we do our best to prepare a fire recruit make that transition from the academy to the street, but we understand it's going to happen. Part of the way that we've addressed that is with this, we demonstrate the way we're going to do something to them so that they understand what's being expected of them. And then we slow walk them, the whole crawl, walk, jog, run philosophy with things. And we build, and then we build skills one on top of the other. We work from donning their SCBA to performing a search to, managing a Mayday, all those sorts of different skills kind of build one on top of the other. And then once they get out of the academy, one of the ways we've addressed it is we will take many of those same skills that they're required to successfully pass in the academy, and we give them a book, and they have to go out once they go on shift, and then they work with, we call them FTOs, field training officers, but in many cases it's like the senior man in a firehouse, something along those lines, where those firefighters will work with that now probationary firefighter and say, okay, well, in the academy, we'll say, say Mark's the senior man and I'm the new probie, in the academy, Mark, they taught me that when I pulled a hand line, I had to put it on this shoulder and I had to reach back with my opposite hand and I had to do this and I had to do that. And maybe Mark says, well, yeah, that will work, but here, let me show you a couple other little tips and techniques that I've experienced, based on whether the tailboard's 4 feet off the ground or the tailboard's 2 feet off the ground, or, different things like that on an engine. That's kind of how we, and we don't completely overcome all those different challenges, between what's taught in the academy and what's taught and what's oftentimes done on the street, but it softens that, takes the edges off of it a little bit, I think, in allowing that young firefighter who's got so much more to learn than they're going to learn, that academy training is just a drop in the bucket. We teach them just enough to make them dangerous in the academy. And that's why they don't get assigned to ride the right front seat right after they graduate, right? They've got to earn their spot and they've got to learn. So, there's a lot of different things that have to happen. But that's kind of how I deal with it, or how we address it.
All right, so I'm going to throw a couple of examples at you, because
Right.
I wholeheartedly, I couldn't agree with you more, right? I have a way that I want to pull hose, and if you work for me, I'm going to teach you that way. But guess what? In doing that, you know how many things that I have tweaked and how I do my hose pull now, how many things I have figured out that work easier or better. So, so here's just some examples of kind of what I'm getting at here, right? Obviously, you have to teach two-person forcible entry. But the reality is most of us will be doing it with one person, two firefighter 24-foot ladder throws, still common practice, and maybe not where you work. Let me caveat that maybe that's not what you're teaching in Indy, but this is just what I see across the country. I get it. I should probably be able to do a 35 by myself. I'm not quite there yet, but a 24 you should be doing by yourself. We don't teach it in most fire academies or firefighter 1 classes.
Mm-hmm.
How many people are on the line for a car fire? But most places you go, it's 1. In the fire academy, it's 3, if not 4. The same with the 2.5. And so what I've been told, and when I start asking you questions, is that ultimately what it comes down to in the certification realm, when you're talking about initial certifications, is that in most states, because it's a quote unquote certification, it has to be tied to a textbook. And in reality, where I see us failing as a fire service is that the textbook doesn't evolve with the profession, right? And so training is the easy scapegoat. Oh, training did this. No, training has a legal responsibility to teach to the text in the curriculum they're given. If that curriculum does not measure up to what we're doing in the street, that's a failure on the curriculum. And that's, a whole nother basket of stuff to get into as far as academia and the fire service and all those things. And so I just want to be clear. I don't think that training is trying to set anybody up for failure or teaching people things that we're not going to do in the street, but rather I think sometimes you're handcuffed on what you're allowed to teach. And there's just not enough time in these classes to say, hey, I have to teach you this because of the curriculum, but let me show you these things that'll work for you when you get to your company.
No, I agree. Yeah. I didn't take it that way. It's easy.
I just wanted to clear it up for the listeners. I didn't want to put you on the spot.
Yeah, no. And I realized that, where I work is an anomaly in the American Fire Service when you think about it, because most departments don't have the size and the staff that I'm fortunate to have. So I get that. You know, our academy is 28 weeks long. You know, most places, you know, they're lucky if they get them for 8 weeks, right? So you got to do the best with what you got. But yeah, it is challenging, and I hate, you know, that whole philosophy of teaching to the test or teaching to the skills, you know, the checkoff sheets, whatever they are. And we do a lot of, that's why I said we try to minimize that culture shock or that skill shock, whatever you want to call it, between the way things get done in the academy and the way things, we try and do things in the academy as much like they will on the street, right? If we're doing engine work, you know, we run four-person engines here, so they're doing it with 4 people, and normally the engineer, the driver is one of the instructors, so you know they're going to be the one to put it in pump, and then the other 3 people on the apparatus are recruits, right? So but I get where you're coming from, right? You got 6 guys on a hand line practicing stretching up a stairwell in a training tower somewhere. We all know that that's not the case, right? So when I've been on engine companies and had fires as a company officer, you know, I'm the doorman. You know, if I'm the company officer, I'm the doorman. I'm chasing kinks. I'm humping hose and everything else, while the firefighter that was on the back step is on the nozzle, because my other back stepper probably got off to catch the plug. So, you know, I get it. We do try and do as much of that as we can to make it realistic. And I think that's important regardless of where you work. You know, it doesn't do me any good. And I tell people all the time, if I go into an all volunteer fire department and I'm teaching VES, or I'm teaching RIT, or I'm teaching, you know, squad company operations or whatever it is, it does me no good to say that I'm going to have 8 or 10 people doing, you know, 2 or 3 different tasks, when in reality, I'm only going to have 3 people on the scene for the first 15 minutes, right? So you've got to make sure that whatever you're training you're providing, it's relative to the staffing and the equipment and the area that you're in.
Yeah, I agree, because you know, kind of going back to what Mark was initially doing before I started teaching and trying to go towards the, you know, academy route to get a hold of these recruits, so I can feel like I do my part and pass it on and set them up for really what they're truly going to expect. A lot of friends of mine who were instructors, I would ask them, like, hey, like, why aren't you teaching this or whatever? And the answer they would give is, we're not allowed to, right? Because there's a certain way that the state proctor is going to come in and issue that exam, and that's how he wants to see it done. And if he sees something different, that's going to be a failure. So as much as they tried to, or they may want to set up that recruit for success, giving them all of those tips and tricks in that entry level thing could actually cost them, you know, moving forward into their career and failing that state exam. And when they told me that, I was like, man, I understood it, but it was kind of like, are we doing the right thing? Right. And that's where, like earlier, I was saying, like, we just don't have a standardization, you know, across the country. And I think that's part of the issue. The only standardization that we can get is, this book has the tests in it. If you do it this way, you'll pass the test, and everybody coming out of the academy will have some sort of general knowledge. I think, you know, with whatever opinions we all have about how it should be or how it shouldn't be, that's probably the middle ground of how we're going to get people into this profession. You know, I mean, the worst thing we can do is get somebody through an academy and show them all those tips and tricks, and they're great, and they get out in the street, and then they go work for a fire department, and they say, well, we don't do any of that shit here. So now they're lost, and they're having to learn all over again, you know? So it's kind of a catch-22, in my opinion, with how we have to do it initially.
Yeah, right on, man. All right, Eric. So how do we make training sexy? how do we make it an assignment people want? Because going back to what I said earlier, right? Those who can't do teach, right? And
Right.
I've known some pretty squared away firefighters that have done some stints in training, but I know for a lot of places, and I'm not going to speak to your job because I don't work on it, but a lot of places training's where you go to die, right? You get in there,
Mhm.
you can't get out. Versus the places where it's a 1 or 2 year tour, it's a recruit class and you're out kind of thing. So what do you guys do, and what are some things you see how we can get some actually squared away firefighters to want to be in training?
Well, I think it starts at the top with, with the chief of the department or your administration, and identifying the importance of training and who you have in training, right? Um, when I first took over the position that I'm in now, um, a lot of the people that were here when I first started in this position are not part of the training division now. Um, Part of them, it was their decision to leave. Part of it was my decision that they left. Part of it was, mutual. I guess I'll leave it at that. But I think part of it starts, and I'll use myself. It starts with having a culture that you want to bring people in. One thing that I've done is give people latitude, give people ownership of it, right? I've been fortunate enough to shake some stuff up around here and bring some people in, seasoned people initially, people that I recruited and was able to convince them to come into the training division. And slowly over the last 6 years, it's kind of grown some momentum. And it used to be one of those things where people didn't necessarily want to be part of training. And now we've got people that are saying, hey, next time you need an engine company, you need a truck crew to come out and help you with the recruits, give us a holler. We'd love to come out and be part of that. Right. And that's all in the attitude and the philosophy of the people that make up the training division. Right. It's not you got to have buy-in from the firefighters for what the training division's doing. And by slowly building up and getting those seasoned people to come in and convince them that, they've got knowledge that they can pass on and say, what you're going to teach this recruit right now, or you're going to teach this young incumbent firefighter right now, they're going to remember that 20 years from now. And so it kind of, you're leaving a legacy on the job, whether they refer to it as what Chief Dreiman taught them or Captain Kresig or whoever it is, you're making your mark, right? And then those people will eventually promote or get time on the job. They may or may not fill a role in training, but they're going to pass information along to that next generation that comes in behind them. And so in certain ways, you're perpetuating your legacy by wanting to be part of a training division and pass along what you know. And then, once I got 1 or 2 key people in here who shared my philosophy and wanted to be really good at their jobs. They were good at their jobs, but they also wanted to make the training better, more interactive, more interesting for the not only the recruits, but the incumbents. Slowly, as I said, it just kind of started to pick up momentum, and to where we are now, where we've got a lot of people that are interested in coming in. And 15 years ago, there would have been no way on God's green earth that they would have had anything to do with the training division. And now we've got those people coming in. But it takes time. It's not something that you're going to flip a switch and all of a sudden people are going to be beating down your door wanting to come in and help with training. But having the right attitude, having a good philosophy, putting out a product that's worth listening to, right? If all you're going to do is just regurgitate an IFSA PowerPoint or a fire engineering PowerPoint or Jones and Bartlett tour, pick your poison, and you're just going to read slides, then you're not going to get that buy-in. But if you make it fun, you make it interactive, and you make it realistic, I think all those things, along with having people with the right attitudes in those positions, you know, it'll grow itself. So.
Yeah, I like how you said that, Chief, because you know, here's the thing, like when you mentioned culture, and one of the things that I'm really big on is culture, and people have got different varying opinions on what culture is or isn't. You know, I've kind of said along the lines of, for me, what culture is generally something that we've instilled into people that has worked out pretty well and created buy-in. That's generally how I feel about it. And I also think that like a position like yours or anybody on your you know, training division who takes that role, you're changing the culture of your department right there in training. And like, what better way to do that, right? Because you get the right people in the right positions for the right reasons, passing out all that stuff. The only thing you're going to do is put more people into the firehouse that share those same values, right? And it may not be instantaneous, you know, like they might want to fight for things and it could be years down the road or maybe until they're promoted. But, you know, having that dedication and that motivation to continue forward to do what's right and, you know, pass on your knowledge and continue to figure out better ways of doing things and just making sure that when you leave, because we're all temporary employees, right? We're going to retire or get fired or quit or whatever the case is. Our career is so short. And we spend so much time in our organizations, you know, fighting for these things that, like you said, you want to leave that legacy. And I don't want to say it's impossible to do inside the four walls of your firehouse, making that change. I think it's a lot easier to impact that culture and everything else straight from the training division, you know, and saying, hey, this is the expectations. This is how we want you to be. Like, love the job, do this, do that. And show them that this is not some negative thing. Like, training is not a punishment, right? You should want to train. Like, that should be exciting for you. Like, what am I going to learn today? Maybe I need to brush up on some skills, like whatever the issue is. If we can get that mentality in the training initially instilled into our firefighters, man, I think we'd have a tremendous turn in our fire service culture. And I think we're getting there. You know, slowly but surely we're getting there and things like that. I think training used to be like a position where I'm on my way out, so I'm gonna go to training and just kind of ride out the last 5 or 10 years. And what I see now is the fire service, in my opinion, is so young right now. You know, a lot of experience it has left or is getting ready to leave, and you have a lot of, like, you go to any fire conference, that should tell you everything you need to know. All of those guys there and girls are all young, you know, hungry firefighters that want the same things. And that's just an incredible thing to see. And, you know, I have faith in it. I think, you know, with that too, that training doesn't always have to be in gear, getting dirty and sweaty. Like, we could table talk things. We could talk, like, there's so much that encompasses that realm, but just get people's minds working, you know, just get them engaged. And I think from there on out, you know, it'll kind of take care of itself. What you got, Mark? Maybe, did Mark leave?
Yeah.
Killed it. So, all right, Chief. Last one on training, I guess, and
All right.
see, make sure I got everybody with me still. I think my internet just went crazy for a minute. So, so my last one for training is this. I think we kind of burden the training division with all of our training needs, right? As somebody that works in a one station department now, we are the training division, right? So what are some tips? What are some tricks? What are some things to make company level training more interesting? Because at the end of the day, that's where training really lives and dies, right? I mean, you're in a large department with a large training staff, and I bet you probably see everybody in that department twice a year if you're lucky. Like, and they're not on a trade, they're not off, right? So we all know you're not providing all the training for your members throughout the year. So I'll just speak from my experience in that, you know, you can only stretch on the parking lot so many times. You can only ladder the fire station so many times. And not everybody has the luxury of having cooperative building owners and residents and things. So So what can we do to kind of help ourselves out at the company level?
Well, one thing we do, and you're right. I tell people, when we talk about department-wide training, it takes us 6 weeks, six weeks, Monday through Friday, for 6 weeks straight, to get everybody through one evolution on the entire job, right? So you're right. We don't have even with the staffing that we have, we don't have the ability to physically go out and conduct that training face-to-face with all of our companies. So I always say it ultimately falls on the company officer, right? And it doesn't mean that the company officer has to deliver all that training. The company officer can designate somebody or ask, hey, who's really good at saws, or who's really good at knowing flow rates or whatever. And then, come up with some training that way. One thing we do is every month we put out 4 trainings that we deliver electronically to the company officers. And sometimes there are specific trainings that cover a specific topic, fires in vacant buildings, or, considerations for vacant and abandoned buildings, something like that. Other times it might be take a crew out, drive your first due, pick 3 buildings, and talk about what you're going to do if you have an emergency there, whether it's a fire, collapse, rope run, whatever it is, right? But the company officers know, and the battalion chiefs who supervise those company officers should know what their people are weak in. And if they're doing their job and they're not just coming in and collecting a paycheck and riding in the right front seat, then they should want to make their people better, because one, the role of the company officer works for those 2 or 3 firefighters that are with them, right? They don't, we get our hierarchy mixed up a lot of times, in my opinion, in that those 3 people don't work for me as the lieutenant or the captain. I work for them because, they've probably all got wives or husbands or significant others that don't want to see anything bad happen to them. They want them to come home the next morning, or they want them to return from the run if you're not on a career department at the end of the run. So as an officer, it's my responsibility to make sure that they do that. It's also my responsibility to make sure that the community's getting the quality of service that they need. So, I've heard there's all kinds of different things, whether it's using YouTube videos, just going down in the bay and picking a compartment and just starting to talk about things. Hey, how do we do this? We haven't done this for a while. Anybody know how this foam eductor works? Anybody remember how to use that? Things like that we can work on. But it's kind of endless, in my opinion. It just depends on what the officer, how big of an imagination the officer has. And I tell people that, historically, if around here, if somebody had an issue with a firefighter, they'd say, well, let's just send them to the training division. Let training fix them. They can't drive, they can't pump, the bells goes off, their brain goes to, what? So we'll send them to training, right? Well, now the philosophy is, and this predates me, but the philosophy is, if you're the company officer and you're coming and you're complaining to us about one of your people not being up to par, what have you done about it, right? You have to hold your officers accountable and set the expectation for them that they're going to provide their people with training in one form or fashion in order to make sure that they're doing that, right? There's a lot of officers that are proactive. They're going to do it on their own. They're going to make it fun. They're going to make it enjoyable. But, not everybody does that. That's why we put out those, I call them canned classes, that we do those 4 topics a month that we put out, because we're catering to the lowest common denominator in some instances where, a firefighter's not, or a company officer's not going to take the time to try and come up with their own stuff. So we provide them with something. But they know their area, they know their people. So it's really up to them to kind of help mold that and develop that. And make it whatever it is, but hopefully good. But, you know, I'm a realist. I realize that it's not always going to be good, but that should be the goal, right? Make it fun, make it low pressure, low key, and just, you know, have a good time with it. So.
Yeah, I agree. And just as Sean was saying earlier, right, it doesn't always have to be, you know, we're going to breathe air and try to kill
Right.
ourselves for 25 minutes to have value. In fact, I would argue it's quite the opposite, right? That's what you work up to. That's the whole point of your training is to get to that point.
Mm-hmm.
I want to drive home a point that you just said when we started the whole conversation because I think it's worth repeating. You're in a large, very large department with a robust training staff. 6 weeks for one rep for everybody on the roster. So next time you think about, oh, don't worry, training division gives me all the training I need this year. Yeah, they gave you one rep every 6 weeks. Tell me again how great you are at this job, please. I'll sit down and I'll even put some coffee on to listen to this. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I agree. I think, you know, and kind of as we briefly passed over earlier, you know, that's kind of where that management leadership training comes in is that there's so much on the company officer these days as budgets get slashed and, you know, the mission expands and, you know, you do have to be good at being creative in a lot of ways and also being brave enough to say, hey, I'm not the smartest person in this
Right.
discipline. So let me have the new guy teach this class. And, you know, if your people, if that reflects poorly on you from your people, you're doing something else wrong along the way, or they are. So,
Mm-hmm.
um, yeah, good stuff. Great conversation. So I'm gonna transition now into some wrap up kind of stuff. You told me when we sat down to chat, you know, you're kind of into the scientific stuff of firefighting, and that kind of made me think about tradition and how
Mm-hmm.
the profession has evolved or devolved, you know, depending on your perspective, I guess. So why don't you start out? Just give me a little bit about, you know, I don't know, kind of an overview of some of the advances you see in the science stuff that's been beneficial. And as you put it, you know, how can the street firefighter use it? Because that's the disconnect to me. People, oh, well, all those idiots with the degree, they're worried about fire dynamics. Well, it impacts you quite a bit in a compartment, but, you know, I'll let you go on with that, Chief.
Right. No, and I don't, when the all the studies started coming out initially, I was probably like a lot of people. I was aware of them and I tried to, you know, read an article about them. But when you start talking, people started talking about heat flux and all these other crazy terms I'd never heard of before. You know, it's pretty easy to get turned off, right? Because it's, you know, it's in many cases they're talking, you know, these, like you said, these propeller heads, they're talking, you know, they're talking a language I don't understand and everything else. And then it, for me, what, and this is going to be kind of funny, but I teach a lot of over the years. I've taught a lot of flashover classes, you know, in the flashover chamber, and we learned early on. And I don't know how many of the people that are on tonight are flashover instructors or have been through flashover chamber a lot, but you know the way they teach you to control the fire in the flashover chamber is with the vent, the vertical vent that's over your head. That's how I was taught when I first became an instructor and everything else. But what I figured out was we could get much better flashes and we could get much better fire behavior if we used the doors on the back of the flashover chamber rather than using the vent, the vertical vent, right? And you know, people started talking about door control and flow path and all this stuff. And one day I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, I had like this light bulb moment. I'm like, oh my God, I was doing door control and managing a flow path, you know, 20 years ago when I first started teaching flashover, and we just didn't call it that, right? But when we open that door, what's it do? Well, it pulls that, you know, it pulls that fire down the length of that flashover chamber container, and fire goes blowing out the back door, right? We shut the door, fire goes away, right? So I think it's important to understand that a lot of what the science is telling us, there are things that maybe we knew and had forgotten, or there are things we haven't forgotten, but they're just explaining them in a little bit different fashion. So I've dealt I've had my battles with people over the years, you know, in the last 6, 8, 10 years when all this fire science stuff started coming out. Well, you can't do this because that's not the way we do it here. You know, we fight all of our fires from the inside. You know, we don't do transitional attack here, blah, 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 you know, all that kind of stuff. And I say, well, wait a minute. If you roll up and you've got a 2-story residence with a porch, you got fire blowing out of both windows, on the window on each side of the front door, and you got fire blowing out the front door, what are you going to do before you go in? Well, I'm going to hit it. I'm going to have to knock that fire down, right? Yeah, that's exactly right. And then what are you going to do? I'm going to go inside and I'll put the fire out because that's what we do. That's what you're supposed to do. I say, well, guess what you just did? We call that's what transitional attack is, right? You hit it from the outside, you darken it down, and then you make your push, right? So nobody's saying you can't continue to do your job the way you've done it. They're just explaining why you should do your job in a certain fashion or a certain way sometimes. So, you know, tradition's important. You asked about tradition. I think that tradition is very important. I'm a big fan of tradition, but that doesn't mean that you got to put your head in the sand and you're not allowed to evolve and do this job differently. So the science, you know, the more it's around, the more you can explain to people that all these different crazy terms that we talk about, they make sense. You know, I know we've had some issues lately with people getting burned at basement fires, because when we have a basement fire, what do? We're going, you know, our job is to haul ass down those basement stairs as fast as we can and take as little heat as we can until we get to the bottom and we put the fire out, right? Well, we've gotten some people hurt, and there's been other people hurt around the country trying to do the same thing. Well, you know, what you talk about flowing water from the outside through a basement window or through a Bilco door or something like that, people they start freaking out. Doesn't mean that we're sissifying the fire service or that we're not making it as macho and we're not going to let you go in. But let's be realistic, right? Our fire gear and our SCBAs have, in many instances, have encapsulated us to the point where we're putting ourselves in situations we shouldn't be putting ourselves in. And just by stopping and thinking a little bit and using the information that we get from the science and from the studies and applying it, we can still be as aggressive as we've always been, you know, more or less. We can still be that interior firefighter that we all want to be, but we have a better understanding of the knowledge, and that just takes laying it out for people in a layman's, you know, just so a truckie can understand it. So, you know, laying it out so that a truckie can understand it and make them realize that it's not trying to necessarily take their job away from them or not let them go interior. It's just a better understanding of how that fire is going to behave and help them better at doing their job.
Yeah, and I think you hit on a good thing earlier, and I think why so many people get turned off to it is how it's sold. Yeah. Right. And so you had this realization that you had been doing door control for however many years, and now somebody puts a name with it, and now they want to push it down your throat. And I think we've done a horrible job of going out to the veterans of the fire service and saying, hey, you know, as we've pushed to learn more in the laboratory, as we've pushed more to help protect you guys, we've come to these findings, right? You've been doing this job a long time. Can you tell me anything in your experience that kind of replicates this, or where it adds up, it makes sense, fill in the blanks? And that may have been done. I'm not saying I don't want to, you know, I don't know, but the way it's sold is not that. The way it's sold is, hey, this is modern firefighting, and if you don't like it, you know, shit or get off the pot, because basically you're a dinosaur and you're trying to kill everybody. And that's, you know, transitional was the perfect thing, right? All they were trying to say was that if you were taught to crawl your ass to the seat of the fire before you open the line, you're stupid. They didn't say you had to go to the C side to come back to the A side and all that crazy crap that people started doing. It was just misconstrued. And so I think maybe by, like you said, people with the VIS thing, right? Somebody wanted some notoriety. They found this thing. They needed a name, so they made a new acronym, a new tactic, whatever, so they could have their 15 minutes. And all it's, you know, it's had this, you know, domino effect of negativity on the other side about the actual science versus, you know, the salesman with it. I do find it funny. You kind of made me think of this when you talked about basement fires. As much as we've evolved in personal protective equipment, hose, nozzles, all that stuff, am I the only one that finds it kind of odd that our face piece still fails at 500 degrees? That
Yeah.
we literally have not advanced it at all in that same time period. The most important, like, I get it. My old lady is probably gonna be pissed off if I burn my arms and legs off, and she doesn't really care if my face probably gets burned, but she wants me to be alive, and that's the one piece that's gonna protect us. And yep, we're not moving forward there. I find that interesting. So
Yeah, I agree.
so as we wrap it up here, I want to stick with tradition real quick. What as these changes have come from the science, from the quote unquote modern fire service, right? And I find it funny and argue with people that kind of came on in the 80s, early 90s, the fog smoothbore thing, because they're so emotional about it because they were being sold what I'm trying to sell now, right? They were sold that smoothbore is the devil and fog is the way of the world, and now I'm trying to go back on that. That's why they're so resistant to it, and I get it. But off the top of your head, what do you think are some positive changes that we've seen from this, and what are some negative changes, things that haven't really played out well?
Well, I think just in general, when I first started, and I started in 1990, was when my first exposure to the fire service. We had air packs, but they weren't necessarily required. The gear wasn't the greatest. I was fortunate. I was one of those guys that always wore a hood. Had full turnout gear, no 3/4 boots, stuff like that. Obviously, that stuff's improved quite a bit. But again, as I mentioned just a few minutes ago, I think in some instances we're so encapsulated now that we kind of lose track of what we're doing because we feel like we're bomb-proof, right? When we really aren't. I think that a lot of the efforts for firefighter health and wellness that have come along in my career, particularly in the last 10 to 15 years, with not only cancer, things like that, but also the mental health aspect of it, and I think those are huge changes. One thing that I'll say, and I'm definitely an interior firefighter, dyed-to-wool interior firefighter, but I find it ironic that, we've been using water since the earth started spinning on its axis, and we're still using water to this day, and nobody's been able to figure out a better way to put a fire out. Not that I don't want to go in and
You're
put it
not a
out.
calves guy? Your
Yeah.
calves was going to save the world, remember?
Yeah. Yeah. I don't have any firsthand experience with that, but let's be honest. Water's still the cheapest, most readily available commodity that we've got. But I think one thing that I will say that I think that firefighters do is they do rely too much on technology. And I'll use the thermal imaging camera, for example, right? Being able to tell the difference between, a hot spot in the wall with a thermal imaging camera and a hot spot in the wall with your gloved fire hand or the back, God forbid you'd pull your fire glove off and feel the wall with the back of your hand or something, right? Because if I just go in there with a tick and don't understand how a tick works, I'm going to start doing a whole lot of property damage that I may not need to make. If I just start seeing hot spots because there's an electrical outlet or there's a hot water line running behind that drywall, things like that. So I think to a certain degree, we've come to rely too much on our technology, whether that's our ticks, our portable radios are a godsend and a great thing, and I would never want to see us not have portable radios. But even that, with everybody's got a portable radio now, and everybody's standing right next to one another. And then what happens as soon as somebody, the officer keys up his mic to tell command something? It sounds like a bag of mashed cats, all underneath a semi-trailer, right? So I think firefighters in general tend to rely too much on their technology and not using what's up here between their ears. Um, maybe that's because we're all walking around with our cell phone out in front of us all the time now, and we're used to looking at a screen. But I think going back and remembering how to do things manually, you know, with the hand tools and using your common sense and your sight and smell and hearing, you know, and all that. I think that's one area that we've actually seen it. We've lost a little bit, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, I agree. You know, for me, I think some of the positive things is I think we have done a lot with technology. I love the thermal imager, but not for the reasons most people do. If you follow Andy Starnes and all the things he'll teach you
Mm-hmm.
about thermal imagers, it's such a great tool, but it's a tool, right? It's not the end all be all. But mine with technology is just, and it's still underused actually in most places, but what we can do now with a laptop in the fire engine as far as directions, hydrants, GPS, pre-plans, notes, like we have so much information at our fingertips, yet we don't utilize it to its full potential. So that's kind of my positive and negative in one. And you know, also I guess I'm kind of, again, I'm a centrist. So the positive of our mission is expanded. The negative is we've traded personnel for that expansion. We've pretended with our decision makers that, oh, we can do all these things and we'll do it with less people too. And that's, you know, where else in any kind of profession do you see something expand while the personnel contracts without any kind of technological fill for that, right? We don't have robots. Probably shouldn't say that. Somebody will probably have one. We'll be out of business, right? But you know, there's just so much one person can do before they're overloaded, and we're teetered right now. We really are. Sean, you got any to add?
Yeah, I got just one small bit on what you guys have both said, and it really boils down to, you know, going back to technology and everything. We've lost our ability to become clinicians with things. We're more like technicians, right? And I use that analogy, like, again, the EMS field, like, always evolving, yet we stay on top of it, right? And there's a big difference between having a basic understanding and truly understanding how to fix an issue. And how that translates on the fire side for us is just like you said, you know, all these tools, like, let's hit on something that we brought up a couple of times already, which is driver engineer. You know, like learning that pump and how it operates and all those things, like that is an essential skill. But our engines and you know, apparatus have evolved so much, and a lot of that stuff's computerized. It's literally put in pump gear, push a button, and just look at the gauges, right? So people who are in charge of pumping fires and things have lost that clinician ability to truly analyze and figure and troubleshoot things out the way that they really need to be done. And, you know, I love the conversation about the thermal imager because, you know, I'm a big search guy. I teach search class, and although it's a very, very good tool to have, when that thing takes a crap on you and the battery dies or whatever the issue is, like you've still got to you've got to go back and think through that process and understand, like, how am I going to get through this? I still got to use my hands. I've got to use like all the senses and things like that. Even fire attack, same way. Like our nozzles have become so advanced, like automatic pressure nozzles and all these things. And, you know, it's just not that they're bad, but we have to get back to learning how to operate without them, because let's be real. Some departments, like, that's what they still have is the basic stuff, you know, and in my opinion, those are probably some of the best firefighters because they truly understand how to use their tools. And, you know, if we're going to talk about training or we're going to talk about, you know, technology or traditions and things, just truly understand all of it, you know. And then, you know, going back to the science that you guys were talking about, my opinion is if you want to be successful doing this, you have to use proven tactics that are backed with real world data. So that's a twofold thing. The tactics and things can be experience based, and the data can be scientific based or experience based. But you really got to like mesh where technology, science, and real street knowledge come together and figure out a way to make them work in unison, right? And for so long, like we operated with all those things. Like you look at these air packs today, those things are so advanced. They're Bluetooth. They got all these things, and they're heavy. And I'm a Scott person. I like simple, basic things, because in a jam, all that stuff it's just not practical for me. I just need to know how to activate my pass and get through and not be weighed down and all those things. So as much as we advance in our career, we need to keep it on a level playing ground, I feel, and understand that the basics will always win, right? Tactics, those put out fires, basic fire skills, like how to utilize your tool, how to perform certain activities. If you don't understand the basics, none of that other advanced stuff means anything, right? It's just another thing that you're carrying around with you. And, like back on the thermal imagers, like every thermal imager is different. So just because you know how to use one doesn't mean you know how to use all of them, right? So what happens when your department gets a new one? You think that you've been using MSA for a long time and now you've got FLIR. Those are two different cameras. They do two different things. You don't know how to read color scales or any of that stuff. Like it really just, it boils down to knowledge, right? And I think that's what we've been hitting on this whole evening is knowledge is really power. I mean, that's what's going to get you through a lot of it. It's important to study what's coming out, but it's also important not to just discard things because, we did that 10 years ago and it's not cool anymore. If it works and there's no reason to change it, don't change it. If there's a good reason, like scientific evidence or, like you have experiences on fire grounds or whatever situations you're on where like this thing no longer works for us, then enhance it, right? Figure out a way to do that. But that's really all I got on the whole thing. Is there's so much to this. We're never going to know it all. It's impossible. We go our whole careers and we're still probably going to know a fraction of what we need to. Mm-hmm. But taking what we have now and having the ability for like UL and all those people to do those studies for us and bringing it to the street and knowing how to apply that. And you can't replace that either. So we have to be forward progressing firefighters, but I don't think we should be so quick to throw out some of our traditions and things that we've been utilizing for long times either, like water, right? Like water works. So maybe there is a better way to put out a fire, but is it cost effective? Is it something that we're going to be able to maintain? And I think that's the ultimate objective is whatever we're doing has to be maintainable. It has to be self-sustaining if it's going to have any value for us.
Yeah, I take the Shark Tank approach, right? Like, what problem are you solving with this product? We don't ask ourselves enough as a fire service. Like, the air pack's is a great example. Give me the stripped down wire pack. I would prefer the pass alarm I had to actually remember to pull off. And I get it, lowest common denominator, but man, I just don't see the advantage to the weight. Like, learn how to talk in an air pack without Bluetooth. It's not that hard. The amp on the side of the mask were fine to me. I don't know. Maybe I'm a dinosaur. So,
well, the thing is, you bring up air packs, and I'll just touch on this real quick. We're in the process of changing our packs, which is fine, whatever. It's no big deal. The thing is, for guys who have been on our department for 17 plus years, and all they know is Scott, and it's very basic, and in the heat of the moment when things are going crazy and everything, they know where everything is and they operate it. You've now taken a whole different turn for them. They've got to relearn this whole thing. So in some sort of way, and this is just my opinion, some may disagree and that's okay, but in some sort of way with that, you're going to lose a little bit of their effectiveness, because now they've got to relearn this whole thing. And you're throwing like a pass device at them, and they've got like all these buttons, and what do they mean? And it's just a timing, I guess, is my point, is like there's a time and a place to implement things. And personally, I feel that like not only just the weight, we got some guys that are getting ready to retire, that weight might be a lot on their backs that's already injured over 30 years of firefighting, or just the technology. Like, let's be real, like that's cool. It can do all these things, but are we going to be using it? If it's something that we're not really going to be using all that often, then I'd rather just have my basic plain pack that I understand and I know and all those things, and let me go do my job without having to think about 1,000,001 other things of, hey, what does that noise mean now? Or, like all these things are flashing my face. I got this giant thing on the side of my air mask that's in the way and my head's leaning this way. You know, it's just, I don't know. It's just, while all those things are great, they're not always practical, in my opinion.
Yeah, the last one I'll throw out, I just threw it in the chat too, is I love how we have less people, so we need air cylinders that are bigger. Like, no, I'm still tired after a 30-minute cylinder. I don't need to work for an hour because you took a person off the truck. Like, that's not how this works, you know, and just our solutions to things. It's just asinine, man. You talk about adding weight, right? Like, I remember when I started, the 45-minute cylinder was for the RIT team, right? And the 60-minute cylinder was for hazmat. And now you literally have people with 60-minute cylinders on their first two. Oh, well, we're only getting one engine, so we got to work 3 times as long. I'm like, oh, but we can't figure out why we're hurting ourselves.
I'm glad you brought that up too, because that is also dangerous in its own way.
Actually, it's 100% dangerous.
You know, now you have a bigger bottle, so you think you have more air, and that's not always the case. Like, what is your breathing technique you're using? Like, how are you physically fit? You know, like all of those things all encompass your air usage. So just because you now have more air doesn't mean you have the ability to work longer. You know?
But it's okay because the low air goes off sooner now, so you could come out sooner with your more air. And just anyway.
Don't get me started.
All right, Chief, we're getting crazy now. So I'm going to wrap it up for me and Sean go diving down in the abyss here. So give me on a send off here. Give me one tradition that we need to keep and one tradition that needs to go.
One tradition we need to keep is knowing your place on the job. I guess, you know, new people have to earn their spot. Nobody, despite what somebody may have been told and when they played t-ball or whatever, not everybody gets a trophy. Not everybody's allowed to have an opinion. I think, you know, the fire service, it's that way for a reason. I think that it's important that we keep that, you know, the concept of a senior man and those sorts of things, I think are very important. Trying to think, can't really think of any traditions off the top of my head that I think should go, because I am, you know, a traditionalist, I guess, for the most part. You know, I think this idea that, and I was talking about some of the modern fire behavior stuff. I think this idea that, you know, we're always going to go inside and we always, you know, have to make that push and take that ass kicking. You know, that's what real firemen do, or firefighters do. I think we need to start taking a little bit broader look at that sometimes and, you know, probably save ourselves some funerals and certainly a lot of injuries if we did a little bit of that, a little more of that nowadays, rather than just always feeling like we have to run headlong into everything, because that's what we've always done. So.
Yeah, right on. I'll give you mine quick. If I had to pick one to stay, it would be company pride. I think we've tried to Fortune 500 ourselves to death, and we all have to look and be the same. We want diversity, but we want robots at the same time. So, you know, let somebody wear their company number on the back of their shirt. Let them have their stickers. Let them have their coins. I mean, uniformity. If you look at the military, not everybody in the Air Force wears the same uniform every day, right? It depends on their mission, their skill set, their workplace. You know, the fire department needs to be the same. I don't understand why we waste so much time over silly things like that. And if we're going to make one thing go, to me, it's giving the new people in the department the cold shoulder when they walk in the door. The cool thing to do is to turn your back and make them, oh, well, if they're going to be part of this team, they need to come talk to us, man. Screw yourself. Get over yourself. Get up. Make the person feel like, you know, you told them they're part of the family. It's not very loving to make them figure it out. So, Sean, what you got? 1 and 1.
So I don't want anybody to misinterpret what I'm trying to say here. I think aggressive firefighting should stay if done properly. You know, like understanding why you're doing the things, not just kicking in the door and going after it because you can. Aggressive firefighting needs to stay, right? It has to happen, because I think we've gotten too comfortable with our own assumptions of what certain studies or things mean, and we've kind of taken more of a me over them approach sometimes, which is warranted on certain instances, don't get me wrong, but not all the time. And I think one thing that needs to go is the hazing that we do in the fire service. There's one thing from like just ribbing a guy jokingly or whatever, but bringing new guys in and treating them as janitors or your own personal maids, I think that the days of that just need to go away. Those people really need to come in. Those guys and girls that are coming in the fire service, they need guidance, they need direction, and they need to understand their job. Like, I'm sorry, just again, my personal opinion, I don't really care about how the toilets look right now. Like, let me make sure that you know where everything is out on the rig and you know how to work it all. And, let's do some training and then we'll come in and we'll all collectively get on these things because we all have a responsibility. And creating that team dynamic where people like to come into work and it's not just figure it out and then I'll yell at you when you do it wrong. That needs to go. That macho attitude thing, I don't think it really solves anything except maybe stroke some people's egos. But, it's just teach people how to be good people, good civil servants, and ultimately just focus on knowing what your primary functions are, and then all that other stuff can come later.
Yeah. Well said, bro. So,
Yeah.
Chief, I enjoyed it. I hope you had a good time. I'm not blowing smoke up your ass when I say this was probably one of the best conversations I've had with somebody about both truck stuff and training stuff. Because usually it's so polarized and blah blah. I learned quite a bit. So I thank you for your time. If you've got anything you want to advertise for, any conferences you're going to teach at, where people can find you, things you do, things you sell, whatever, the floor is yours.
Well, I'm not much of a salesman, so I won't try and peddle anything. But I'll just say, I'm on Facebook. So if you ever need me for anything, just reach out, send me a message. I'll get back with you. Last name's Dreiman, Dreiman. You can search for me on the internet and probably find me. Article I wrote or a class I taught or something. That's really about it. Hopefully, I learned a lot. Appreciate everybody sitting in on this tonight. The ones who did. Sean, I've known of you for a while, and Mark, I've known of you for a while, but getting to see you face to face, at least virtually and over the internet, it's kind of nice. So I know Sean's coming down my neck of the woods here a couple months to in Angola. So maybe we'll cross paths up there. So yeah,
Angola's a great. I've been to Angola. That's a group right there. They'll show you a good time, man. I had a blast. They got some cool places to go after training in Angola. What a hidden gem that is. Oh man, good times. Sean, what you pushing tonight, buddy? Where you gonna be at in the next 2 weeks, which will be 45 things?
Yeah, February's Orlando Fire Conference. I'll be going teaching SCBA confidence class there. Then heading up to, from there, North Florida Fire Expo, Louisiana, the Lift Conference, and then back, Georgia from there. And I got all kinds of things going on, man. It'd be between teaching for Task Force 1, doing some online stuff and traveling with them and doing my own thing. And FDIC, obviously, I'll be doing a searchable versus survivable lecture there this year, which is pretty cool. So I'm excited for that. Trying to stay as busy as I can, really. The biggest thing that I got going on right now, which is time consuming, is what we talked about earlier, is that fire conference that we're trying to put on here in the state. Be in Angola, so that's going to be fun. We'll be there with Chief Mo Davis, doing some lectures, so that's going to be a good time. So, me, dude, all over the place all the time, 100 miles an hour.
Yeah, I hear you, bro. I got North Florida Fire Expo on the books, and then I'm going to be sitting on the side of I-20 with a sign that says "We'll teach for money." So, if anybody wants to have me out, I promise. I've got the COVID now, so it should be gone by the time I need to travel. The only other thing I got going on, I'm pushing some T-shirts and hoodies and stuff on the website. I'm going to try to do a reorder tonight. So if you hear this in the next couple of days, I can probably still add to it. So if you're interested, the fireinsidepage.com is where you can find that stuff. That's all I got tonight. I'm again, what a great conversation, Eric. I really do appreciate you being here. Hopefully, we'll be able to follow it up with somebody good for February. So follow the Unlock Your Culture webcast on Facebook and look for that announcement. Everybody have a good night.
Thanks.